Genesis 3:7. Verse 7. And the eyes of them both were open, not of their bodies, but of their minds, not so as to have an advanced knowledge of things pleasant, profitable, and useful, as was promised and expected, but of things very disagreeable and distressing. Their eyes were open to see that they had been deceived by the serpent, that they had broke the commandments of God, and incurred the displeasure of their Creator and kind benefactor, and had brought ruin and destruction upon themselves. They saw what blessings and privileges they had lost, communion with God, the dominion of the creatures, the purity and holiness of their nature, and what miseries they had involved themselves and their posterity in, how exposed they were to the wrath of God and the curse of the law, and to eternal death. And they knew that they were naked. They must know before that they were naked in their bodies, but they did not perceive that their nakedness was at all uncomely, or any disadvantage to them. But now they were sensible of both, that whereas they could look upon it before, and not blush or feel any sinful emotions in them, now they could not behold it without shame, and without finding evil concupiscence arising in them, and being now the cool of the day, and their spirits also seized with fear of the divine displeasure, they might feel a shriveling all over them, and wanted something to cover them, but more especially this may respect the nakedness of their souls, that were now conscious of being stripped. So feeling the shriveling all over them and wanted something to cover them, but more especially that this may respect the nakedness of their souls, they were now conscious of being stripped of that honor and glory, privileges and power they were vested with, and having lost the image of God that was upon them, and that robe of purity, innocence, and righteousness, the vicissitude of their nature, with which they were arrayed, and finding themselves naked and defenseless, and unable to screen themselves from the curse of the righteous law, and the fury of vindictive justice. And they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves apron, not to cover their whole bodies, but only those parts which, ever since, mankind has been ashamed to expose to public view, and which they studiously conceal from sight, the reason of which perhaps is, because of those members, the original corruption of human nature has been from the beginning, and still is propagated from parents to children. The leaves of the fig tree were pitched upon because the largeness of them. The leaves of the common fig tree are very large, as everyone knows, and perhaps those in the eastern countries, and especially in Paradise, were much larger than ours. Pliny says of the fig tree that its leaf is the largest and the most shady. Some think the Indian fig tree is meant. Pliny, the breadth of the leaves of the tree have the shape of an Amazonal shield, and when they are said to sew them together, it is not to be supposed that they sewed them as tailors sew their garments together, since they cannot be thought to be furnished with proper instruments, or that they tacked them together with some sort of thorns, or made use of them instead of needles. But they took the tender branches of the fig tree with leaves on them, as the word signifies, see Nehemiah 8:15, and twisted them around their waist, which served for girdles, as some render the word, and the broad leaves hanging down served as aprons. But these, whatever covering they may be thought to have been to their bodies, which yield seems to be but a slender one, they could be none to their souls, or be of any service to hide their sin and shame from all seeing eye of God, and of as little use are the poor and mean services of men, and their best works of righteousness, to shelter them from the wrath of God and the vengeance of divine truth.